Hello! Today we're going through some common mixing issues that can make or break your track. We're talking about terms like muddy, thin, harsh, tinny, and boomy. Now, these terms are subjective. What sounds boomy to another person may sound muddy to another. Instead, in the future, try to explain your audio problems with hertz, like too much 200 hertz here, and so on. That way, we won't confuse each other. But let's dive in, listen to some examples, figure out why they happen and how to solve them. First up, muddy. This is typically around the low mids, 200 to 500 hertz, when it starts stacking up and it's missing some clarity and it becomes murky and cluttered. Imagine trying to hear a song through a foggy lens, you know? But let's hear what a muddy mix sounds like. Yeah, you hear that? It's like every instrument is competing for space down there. Muddy mixes usually happen around the low mids when there's just too much going on and instruments start to blend together. But Mickey, how do we fix it? To clear up the muddiness, let's start by using a high-pass filter on instruments and vocals maybe that don't need those bass frequencies. You can also cut around the 200 to 500 Hz on selected tracks to make room for the more important bass elements. You can do this by using a multi-bind compressor in Ableton, or if you have it, you can use a dynamic EQ that also does wonders. But sometimes, and a lot of the time actually, there's just too much happening. It all boils down to arrangement. Every track in your mix should add something new, and if it doesn't, maybe you should just cut it out. If it's simply not being heard, maybe just cut it out. Always prioritize room in your mix. If they could mix records in the 50s to be more clear than we can today, with all the fancy stuff that we have today, maybe we just need to boil it down to the simplistic stuff. Arrangement. Thin. Thin mixes lack body, they sound weak, as though all of the lower frequencies were pulled out of it. Like if a chorus of a track drops and there's no punch or depth to it. And yeah, that's not good. So here's an example of a thin mix and let me show you how to fix it. While making this video, I realized that especially fixing a thin mix is sometimes pretty tough. So use these tips for starting advice, but know that there is a lot to be learned about fixing thin mixes. So I will be making a video in the future on that subject by itself. Like and subscribe. This is usually caused by cutting too much bass. People, including myself, like to say that you should high-pass filter a lot of your stuff in your mix to leave room for the bass elements. And that is true, but you should only cut the bass that you don't need. If you just start high-passing everything in your mix, it will lack depth and ultimately body. So to fix this, you need to think about what drives your track and where the different instruments lie in the audio spectrum. You don't have to cut everything because you're afraid of muddiness. Sometimes you just simply need some bass elements to fill out the gaps. Like here, I end up adding a new bass layer to fill up the low end a bit more, while leaving a bit of room for the kick still. Next, let's look at harshness. This happens around the mid-highs to highs, around the 2 to 6 kHz area, when it just gets too intense. If it feels like the sound is piercing your ears, that's harshness. Let's hear an example and ruin. That's a bit much. Harshness can be caused by over-boosting with EQ the high mids, or it can be caused by miking your instruments too close to the instrument. It's pretty common in vocals and cymbals if you're not careful. I think this is usually a problem because people have a muddy mix and they try to give it clarity by boosting the highs. You shouldn't do that. This just turns everything up and ultimately ruins your mix. Try using a multi-band compressor on the high mids, or if you have it on, maybe a de-esser. And you should look at the levels of the whole arrangement. If the high-pitched instruments are just too high level, you should just turn them down a bit. Now we got Boomy. This is when there's too much low end, making the bass overpower everything else in the mix. By itself, the bass may sound powerful and nice, but in the context of the whole mix, it just overpowers everything. And remember, you should always try to mix your music in context of the whole mix, not solo so much. But let's hear an example and let's look at how you can fix it. Okay, to fix boominess, try using a high-pass filter on instruments that don't need them, like we did with muddiness. For the bass itself, maybe consider cutting around the 100 to 200 Hz area. We do this to reduce the boom while maintaining the weight of the bass. If it's in the style of your music, you could also use a sidechain compression with the kick and the bass to have a dynamic relationship between those two, like this. And again, consider just turning down the bass and focusing on other elements to make it pop more. It doesn't necessarily make your track sound better to just turn up the bass. Sometimes there's an underlying problem somewhere else in the mix. And finally, Tinny. Tinny's not as common, but it usually just happens when there's too much treble, not as much low or mids. And it makes the sound more sharp and metallic. Here's what it sounds like. Tinny sounds are common, I think, if you're mixing on some speakers that are very bassy or headset that's very bassy. So you think the music is more bassy than it actually is, and you cut a lot of it out. But when you get to a proper speaker, you can hear that it's not good. And it ends up sounding, well, like a tin can. Fix tinny sounds, first look at how the levels are in your track. Then you can try and reduce the treble a bit with an EQ. And you can also use a low shelf EQ to put in some warmth in the bass again. And if you do have problems with badly adjusted speakers or headset, there are services like Sonarworks that can fix your sound and make it more flat and balanced. I'm not sponsored and I haven't tried it, but I thought it was worth mentioning. So that's a quick guide to some common mixing issues and terms and how to fix them. Remember, these are subjective, so just trust your ears and experiment. And if someone says that your mix is harsh or muddy, well, at least you know what they probably mean now and how to fix it. All right, folks, happy mixing. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye. Click this video. This video is pretty good, I'm pretty sure, because YouTube wants you to click it because it's recommended to you. So you should do it, actually. You should probably do it. I'm pretty sure you'll learn something. And if not, maybe you'll be entertained. Maybe, who knows, maybe. You should click it.